Good morning, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode 115 of Be With Me in the Book of Acts. And I'm going to start with World War II history today. Famous quote by General MacArthur when he left the Philippines. He was at a train station, and the President of the United States had asked him to leave the Philippines because the President was afraid that he would be captured by the advancing military of Japan, and this was in the dark days of World War II, March 11th, 1942, and he said the famous words, "I shall return to the Philippines." Nothing could be more certain, he said. And he was true to his word, and 2 years later, in 1944, when the tide of the war had changed, he did return to the Philippines, and there's a famous picture of him wading ashore on the island of Leyte. All right, so where does that come from? Well, Paul is going to leave his second missionary journey, cruise through Ephesus, and tell them similarly that he is going to come back. I will return to you if God wills. So let me read the passage today. This is the conclusion of the second missionary journey, which by my account was actually Paul's seventh missionary journey, but that's another matter. This is from Acts chapter 18, and it's going to start in verse 18. After this, Paul stayed many days longer. He's finishing up in Corinth. He's been there for 18 months, and this is many days after 18 months. Okay. Starting over. After this, Paul stayed many days longer and then took leave of the brothers and then set sail for Syria. He's heading to Antioch, which is in Syria. And with him, Pricilla and Aquilla. At Cenchreae, he had cut his hair, for he was under a vow. And they came to Ephesus, and he left them there, that is Priscilla and Aquila. But he himself went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When the people of Ephesus, when they asked him to stay for a longer period, he declined. But on taking leave of them, he said, "I will return to you if God wills." And he set sail from Ephesus. And when he had landed at Caesarea, so that's a port city near Jerusalem, he went up and greeted the church. That's the church at Jerusalem. And then went down. It's actually geographically north, but it's elevation-wise, it's down to Antioch, which was his sending church. And then the next verse belies a period of time, which is probably maybe 12 or 18 months. Verse 23, after spending some time there, he departed and went from one place to the next to the region of Galatia and Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples. So he launches off into the third missionary journey, right on verse 23, literally the next verse, even though there's a good bit of time in between that. All right, I want to start with a couple things. First of all, is quiz number one. Who wrote the book of 1 Corinthians? Everybody would say Paul. But Sosthenes actually is mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 1. Paul, who called by the will of God to be an apostle of Jesus Christ, and our brother Sosthenes. Who knew? Sosthenes helped Paul write the book of 1 Corinthians. And that was because it is in his last few minutes in Corinth, they seized Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the tribunal. But Galileo paid no attention to any of this. That is, he was sort of just randomly beaten by the mob because they were mad because they couldn't get to Paul. So that's interesting. Quiz number two is, how long did Paul stay in Corinth? Well, 18 months is the book answer, but it's 18 months and many days longer. So a little bit longer than 18 months. Quiz number three is, who started the church in Ephesus? Well, Paul started, I guess you could say. He went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews there, but the meat of the church was probably established by Priscilla and Aquila. They're Jews who left Rome under persecution because the emperor kicked all Jews out of Rome. They ended up in Corinth, and Paul took them on this return trip, and their first trip by boat landed in Ephesus, and he left them there, verse 19. Paul is under some sort of a vow, maybe a vow of thanksgiving or something. It's not too clear. And he's on his way back, and maybe he's kind of hightailing it. Remember all along here, what's the Lord doing? The Lord is taking a people for his name, and specifically including the Gentiles, to take them from them a people for his name. That's from Acts 15:14. That's what's going on with these missionary journeys. Let's just review the journeys. First missionary journey was from AD 46 to 48, maybe 18 months, and they keep getting longer and further distance. That was about a 1,581-mile trip. The star of that show was Galatia, which is a region of 4 churches, and that's a region, not a city. Then the second missionary journey was twice the number of miles, 3,050 miles. The star of that show definitely was Corinth, because he spent the most time there. That was about a 2.5-year journey. That was from late AD 48 to the spring or early summer of AD 51. And then finally, tomorrow we'll get to the third missionary journey, which is just a little bit further, 3,300 miles, but it was much longer, 5 years, from 52 AD to 57 AD. So a 12-year period of time, of which he's on the road for probably 9.5 years of it during this first, second, and third missionary journey. The fun thing about the end of the second missionary journey is it foreshadows the beginning of the third missionary journey, because after he leaves Antioch for the third missionary journey, he goes through the region of Galatia, but spends most of his time in Ephesus. So I will return, or if the Lord wills, I will return to Ephesus, and indeed that is what happens. So stick around. Tomorrow we're going to hear about what had happened while he was gone in Ephesus. Thanks for listening, and thanks for joining me on these 3 missionary journeys. I'll see you tomorrow.